Buildings and cityscapes have the power to hold memories, shaping our identities and lifestyles. From iconic landmarks to everyday homes, the places we inhabit influence our emotions, memories, and sense of belonging. With that, it is my great pleasure to welcome you all to our third edition of the Ras Al Khaimah Art Festival's 2025 Speaker Series. My name is Janan Farhat, and I'm a researcher and your moderator for today's session. Our panel, titled Stones and Stories, Impacts of Architecture on Memory, explores how architecture weaves itself into our lives, leaving a lasting impact on who we are and how we connect to the world around us. We have a fantastic panel of speakers for you today that I'm very honored to introduce. To my immediate right, we have Dr. Iman. That awkward moment. Dr. Iman Asi, an associate professor in urban design at the American University of Ras Al Khaimah. And we also have, to her right, Mr. Will Bennett, the founder of Wilden Design Dubai. Did I get that right, Will?
Wilden.
Wilden? Oh, almost. Thank you so much. Thanks to both of you for being here today, and to our audience for coming to listen to our talk. So, Dr. Iman, I have my first question for you. You recently published an article on the social housing program, or Shabiyat housing. So, based on your research, can you tell us about the architectural particularities of former traditional settlements in the mountains of Ras Al Khaimah?
Thanks a lot, Jana. Thanks a lot for coming. To tell you a little about my background. And I came here to UAE since like 15 years ago, and I started in Dubai, and then I moved to Ras Al Khaimah, and I start looking for. My specialty is cultural heritage. When I moved here, and I start looking for the cultural heritage here, and I thought going to the mountain and some of the Emiratis. Have you done any hiking in? No, are you there? They told me that there are wheat farms up the mountain. I said, no, you are kidding. He said, yes, it's all green. And I met also another Emirati when I was doing a hiking. And he said, and I go almost every week to my farm up the hill. I said, no, you are kidding. He said, yes. And I go and check it. So, and I decided to go up to the mountain and to see all these wheat farms. And together with the wheat farm, started my journey with the houses there at the mountain. And I was really, astonished about the way, it was built. And to tell you the truth, if we talk about traditional architecture of UAE, the most two defined constraints of this traditional house is the climate and the cultural values and the values. The climate, because they, UAE as in the Gulf, they are living in a very, very extreme climate. They are very hot and humid together. These are really killing, and imagine people are living like 50 years back. They are trying to counter all these in their houses, the way they live in their houses. And this is in the mountain, sometimes it's very cold also. So I start looking at the houses, how they built. I don't know if you have been also to some of the houses on the mountain. It's just a natural response to the climate. The way they were built. They have this material which is stone. They built it very small, embedded in the mountain, because they don't want to make it to avoid expose a lot of the walls to the exterior, and very small. And they built it on terraces. And they don't need a lot of spaces in for their houses. Most of the time, they are looking for their living. What type of living there is in the mountain? Most of them are either animal farming or farmers on the weeds. So, all this comes even with the urban fabric about the houses. If you look at the house, every small house they call qifl because it's embedded like 1.5 meters in the ground. and they are grouped together. So even the social structure is there. I mean, because of the wheat farms, there are some collective work to cultivate the wheat. So they are really around the wheat farms. So I mean, even the way they earn living are reflected into their houses. Not even that, because Ras Al Khaimah, I mean, they are living in the mountain. I mean, there are some kind of movements from up the hill down to the valley. I mean, it depends on the season. In the summer, they go up the mountain. In the winter, because it's very cold, they go down, and they have all the same houses up and down. And something else, I used to meet a lady, an old lady. I mean, I talked to her, and she said we used to work all day. I used to do all this incense burner, and I used to go down to sell it for 1 dirham. And everyone was sharing this memory. If you go into the house itself, because they don't want to be exposed to the sun, there are a little of windows there. So everything is reflected the environment and topography.
Have you been to Al Halla Mountain Village, Dr. Irina?
Yes.
Have you been?
Yes.
So you've seen the small. You want to tell them a little bit about Al Halla Mountain Village?
Actually, I did many hiking. With the helps of Emirati, Al Halla, it's the one which is deserted.
Yeah.
The deserted. It's not only one group of housing. Even I don't know if you are also aware. Only Al-Shihi and Al-Hubus tribals are living in these mountains, and they are extend from north to the south. They reach Oman even to Hatta, and they are grouped into villages. They call villages. I don't know how many, but they are a lot. Some of them they grouped. It's deserted, but one of them are. Now has been restored, and they're trying to make it as a tourist destination. Even in these villages, they have some places for cemetery. People are like, so it was, I don't know if they will expose later, open to the tourists, but it's one of the villages, it's called Al Halla, which will be open for the tourists to come and to go there and experience how the Emirati used to live in the mountain. Just to mention also one point, of course, these people who used to live in the mountain now, they were given a land because of the social housing. My paper is on social housing. They were given a land down the valley for their, to be more, more better than living in the mountains. But later, with all the Emiratis who has been now living in a better conditions, and their economic status are better, they return back to the mountains, and they build their only like summer house, same materials, same type of housing. It's like nostalgic for the past.
It's very nostalgic, and as someone who has sneakily found my way to Al Halla Mountain Village, I did some exploring with some vague coordinates on the internet.
Yes.
And it's absolutely beautiful sights. And you're absolutely right. I was having a hush-hush conversation with a government official who told me that they are actually working on opening it to the public, inshallah, in maybe next year or two. But they already have a viewing deck, which is very, very nice. And just so you all have a little bit more context, Al Halla Mountain Village is a mountain village hidden in the mountains in Ras Al Khaimah. It's about, I think, 20 minutes from the city center. It's it's an easy drive, but hard to find because the village itself is very hidden. So you have to go through maybe 20-30 minute walk in order to finally find the village.
But they are working on the track also.
They are.
There. It's like a few. Yeah.
They're working on, I think, paving it and making it a little bit more accessible. But it's incredible because this is a very old village. I think it dates back at least 200, 300, 400 years, right? And inshallah someday it'll be a little bit more Googleable, but it is actually very, very interesting and one of the prettiest cultural heritage sites I've seen in Ras Al Khaimah.
Maybe also, Anna, I want to mention, because one of the Emirati used to take us up the mountain, and he told me, I said, where is your house? He said, my house is not in UAE, it's in Oman. And only us, we are given the permission to go and visit our house, because they ask us, where do you want to, do you want to have an Emirati or an Omani passport? They said Emirati, but they are allowed us to go to their houses in Oman, and they did. They visit their houses. The connection with their past and their old villages is very strong. They're nostalgic. Yeah.
No, it's incredible. Even the houses here, I was literally saying this last week to someone, the houses in Al Jazeera Al Hamra still have owners. The municipality has a record, so it's very cool. If you walk around, you'll also get to know a little bit more about some of the owners of the houses here, and learn a little bit more also about the lifestyles and the history of the people in Al Jazeera Al Hamra. So thank you so much, Dr. Iman, for telling us a little bit about the mountain village and also your work. Will, as the founder at Wilden Design, your journey and work has been deeply rooted in reshaping outdoor spaces. Are there particular projects or landscapes you've worked on that have maybe resonated with you personally and left a lasting memory?
Thank you for the question. Yeah, absolutely. Every single project that I've worked on, particularly of any value to me, I have some personal connection with. Dating back to my university thesis project, I worked on a site in the UK, which was the national centre for all of the Ukrainian migrants in the UK, and my mother is Ukrainian, so that was a place that was really meaningful for me, and I chose that site because it had instilled memory for me as a child. But since moving to the UAE, equally all my projects that I hold close to my heart have got some element of me in them and vice versa of them in myself. And I think that's what I've learned over my career, is that the most valuable places that we hold dear to ourselves, we have an element of growing with them over time, of sharing some changes in our own lives with particularly the landscape. I find it much easier to connect with the natural world than I do with the built environment for that reason, because things change, plants grow and die, and seasons affect us, and there are seasons in our own lives. And this is why I'm really passionate about landscape as a way to build connections with the place, because it's something that we share with nature that we don't have in the built environment. So at the moment, I'm working, our practice is focused on residential gardens purely. I used to work on a lot of commercial projects, but I found residential gardens are really the key place that we all have our own personal experience with the outdoor living world. Whether it's a balcony garden or an entire farm, it doesn't matter. That if you have a living element that you nurture and cherish and grow, there's an opportunity to convene with the natural world and start to appreciate it. And so in my current garden, which I've literally just finished building, I've really tried to pack in as many of the values and elements that I've learned in the 10 years in UAE. So whether it's from the frankincense tree, which is at the heart of my garden. And by the way, my garden is tiny. It's about 35 or 40 square meters. So like 4.5 meters by 8 meters around that. So I've got a frankincense tree right in the heart of my garden. It's a tree that I really just learnt about 5 or 6 years ago when I was working on the sustainability pavilion in my previous company. And with one of the doctors from the Eden Project in the UK, Dr. Mike Maunder, he taught me the story of how the frankincense tree has had this huge cultural value in east of Africa and Oman and Yemen, and was sort of pillaged for many years, particularly by the Roman Catholic Church and many others for its value as frankincense resin. But now it's starting to make a comeback through a lot of efforts to sort of sustain the tree and protect it. That really resonated with me, and I went to Roman Catholic Church as a child in the UK, so the smell of frankincense is sort of ingrained in my nose, and the beauty of this tree is incredible. It's a really stunning tree, and so it was the first tree I chose to put in my garden. And I kid you not, I stand in my kitchen and look out the window every single day and just look how many new leaves have come on the tree, and it's quite obsessive, I'll admit, but to just have that connection with something that's growing at the same rate as me, and to be able to see every new branch and every leaf on that. I think it's just a very small example of how the landscapes that we inhabit and own, or rent maybe for the short time that we live here, if you are an expatriate, they're a really important part of your life and your self-identity.
And if you don't mind my asking, have you ever gotten requests from people who had an idea for an outdoor garden that they'd like to have made, but perhaps wanted non-indigenous trees or plants, maybe things that would struggle to grow in this environment? Like, how would Wild and Design tackle that particular challenge, maybe?
Mostly we would kindly refer them to someone else, to be very honest. I used to, we were just talking before this chat, I wrote an article probably about 6 or 7 years ago proclaiming the benefits of artificial grass. And when I came to this region, I thought, well, if it's saving water, of course it must be a good thing because we're in an arid country. And I did all the analysis and put a case forward that artificial grass was a really good thing for the region. I've since learned the error of my ways. And the same is true with mostly highly tropical plants as well. Just because we can grow them here doesn't mean it's necessarily the right thing to do. So as a practice, we generally avoid highly tropical gardens, of course, but sometimes there is a need to bring in some subtropical plants because particularly the need for shade. I think if you want a successful outdoor space, it needs shade. And as soon as you bring in shade, then a lot of the native plants don't work too well. So our gardens have a season of themselves, particularly when we start with native species. They might start out fully native or endemic, but over 2 or 3 years, as the trees grow and cast more shade, then we actually start to need to change those plants out to maybe some of those subtropical plants.
So would you say that there's a lot of harmony in how you pair the plants together, what plants you choose, and like how everything comes together towards the end?
Yes, absolutely. But there is no end. This is what I've also learned from my mother. No less. Like, she was an avid gardener her whole life, and the garden is in a constant season of change. So, I try and pass that on to our clients now that you're not buying a finished product. The garden, as it's built on completion day, is just the beginning of the story.
I like that. I think because we sometimes like to think of things that we have in our spaces that we quote unquote own, as things that will stay the same until we decide to change, but they will grow and change on their own, right? And I think that's a very, very, I think that's actually a very powerful moral take on, making sure to choose plants that can grow and thrive and maybe don't necessarily need the same amount of the water they would need in like a tropical environment. So thanks for sharing that. Dr. Iman, I come back to you. So you have, of course, an award-winning book on traditional houses in Dubai. You highlight their cultural and architectural significance. How do you approach the documentation of historic buildings in a way that not only preserves their physical form, but also captures the stories and the memories embedded within them?
Okay, and as I told you, I was working at Dubai Municipality at the Architecture and Heritage Department. And my boss, he told me, let's write a book on traditional houses of Dubai. And I like the idea actually because, as Janan said, houses, it tells us who we are. It's part of identity. What do we do every day? What is our cultural values? It's really a very good reflections of ourselves and our identity. And I don't know if you are aware of Dubai. Part of Dubai was in Shandaga. Have you been to Shandaga? Where are all these museums? It was the whole site, with 95, it's like 25% of Jazirat al-Hamra, 95% were destroyed because these houses were used to be for the sheikhs or the family of the sheikhs, and because of the post-oil, they left it and they went for better houses. And by the time these houses were getting deteriorated and even lived by labor, so they said, no, we don't want these houses to be like this. So they decided to demolish it in 1 week. But when they do demolish for this, I mean, they take videos of that, and of course they subsidize the owner. This is part of the houses in Dubai. The others were in Shanda and Fahidi area for merchants of Iran who came and they built their merchants with them and they built it. It's called now Al Fahidi. And the other one, houses of Deira near the Gold Souk for expatriate, mainly Arabs or something, near the Gold Souk. So these are, the book was about all these three areas, and every area is different from one another, who live there, what do they do, their economic and social status. And there is some kind of a difference between these in terms of the size of the house, how they live together, how their relation to the water or to the other people. But in general, I mean, people in UAE, if they are on the sea, they are trader. So I mean, the mobility is a very strong factor. I mean, they go and travel and come back. And when they go, I mean, of course, when they are in the sea, they are either doing with fishing or pearl fishing. So they go and come, and when they go and come, they see something, and ideas are traveling with them. They exchange it. Going back, I mean, also to the climate. So if you visit any house in Dubai, you can see a reason for why it comes like this. For example, in the sea, they don't have stone like in the mountain. In the mountains, they have the stone. What do? They went into the sea and they bring the coral stone and built with it. And luckily, this coral stone, because it's porous, it works with them for the insulation. And with the thick walls, they can really work with reduce the temperature. They didn't have a lot of windows inside their houses outside because they don't want to be exposed to the sun. Minimal. So if you go to their houses, and I think here also the same, most of their houses are almost dark. I mean, it's dark because they don't want the light. Sometimes they have air cooler. They bring air, but they don't. They prevent sun.
We call them wind catchers.
No wind catcher. Yes. Barjil. I don't know if you know Barjil. There are some Barjils here, but in Dubai, in Al Fahidi, there is. I mean, the most concentration of Barjil in UAE is in Al Fahidi. It's because they were influenced by Iranian, because in Al Fahidi, a merchant from Bastak, they came and built their houses. So they used this wind catcher or barjil. They call it barjil. And if the barjil is above a room, it can reduce the temperature to 6 degrees. Imagine, I mean. So the more lucky they have, more barjil, I mean, they are more comfortable. But they can't provide it. I mean, the most house which has 4 barjil is Sheikh Saeed house, who is the father of Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid. He has like 4 barjil. It's very expensive to build a barjil at that time. Then, I mean, you go to the cultural values, the privacy. The privacy is very important for the Emiratis, I mean, and the Islam values. So you can see the open court inside the house. Most of the houses, even here in Jazirat al-Hamra, they have an open court because, I mean, to give a comfortable atmosphere for the woman to stay at house. With the Liwan, I mean, shaded area, they have also a tree, mostly almond tree. They have some, they don't have fountains. In Bilad al-Sham, we have fountain, water, but because here there is a scarce of water, they don't have it. They have tawi, which is well, because the level of water is very shallow, so they can have it. Most of their rooms are linear, narrow, because I don't know if you can see the shandal, it's built of shandals. They bring it from Zanzibar because it's very narrow and straight, so they can make the roof out of it. And the length of my roof is around 3 meters something, so they can't have it wide. So when we came, I mean, to your question, when we went to document, as I said, I mean, we have the video. So we went to the video, and when they demolish it, they put it on ground zero like this. So it was easy for us, I mean, just to dig, and we can find the the foundation. So it's like the plan of the house was very clear for us. There is also an interesting, they demolished all the houses, they kept the trees, which means that the trees meant really a lot for them. The house does not mean anything, but the trees is there, and they kept also the mosques. So, from the aerial photo, we can see if we have a tree, so there is a house, and this tree is an open court. So, this also helps us to document and draw the houses again. Most of the owner, if we talk about 80 and we start documenting in maybe 2000, they are still living. So we have their names, we went to them, talked to them, and some of them, they draw the plan in their memory. We have aerial photos, shows different times, so we can see the transformation of the house, how it was, and how through time. So it was, and after we draw it, we show it also again to the owner. I don't know if this is enough. I can. So we end up with 28 houses documented in a book in English and Arabic.
That's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. And I think, like, as you're speaking, I'm just thinking of everything I know about Al Jazeera Al Hamra, because I was just mentioning to Dr. Iman and Will that there are over 550 buildings in Al Jazeera Al Hamra. I think people don't realize it because they follow the path from parking 1 to parking 2, and they see a few houses here, and they're like, oh, maybe there's about 50 houses. No, 550 is definitely quite a lot more. And I love how you were talking about how much the house speaks about its inhabitants. And even here, if you go to Beit Ahmed bin Amran or Beit Abdel Karim, which is Beit 16 and 17, you realize that these houses are actually very close to the shore, because these were merchants who needed access to the water, and I think they'd also bring in their boats closer to shore. And so much of their livelihood depended on the sea for fishing, but also for pearl diving in particular. And there are very few houses that have a second story. But I was just walking around yesterday and I saw the Ahmed bin Umran house, and it has 2 stories. And that's also a measure of wealth. So when you enter the houses in Al Jazeera Al Hamra, and if you go to Basakia and other historical sites with old houses, walk around the house and see how spacious it is. Because space means more money, maybe a bigger family, or multiple families living together, maybe like the patriarch of the house and the matriarch and their children and their children's children. But houses do speak so much, and even more ornate designs will tell you that the people of the house had a little bit more money to spare, because the designs of the walls or the gates are a little more intricate. So it's absolutely fascinating, and I myself am also very interested in this topic, so I'm sharing a little bit as well. But thank you so much, Dr. Iman. And we're still talking now quite a lot about Jazeera Al Hamra and how everything is influenced by the climate, right? And the desert environment, as we know, and as you mentioned earlier, presents very unique challenges for landscape architects. Excuse me. So, Will, how do you transform such a seemingly harsh environment to something vibrant and memory-rich when you are planning your outdoor gardens for clients?
I think beyond the design element, which is perhaps we'll come on to, one of the most important things I've learned recently is education. Because with all the best will in the world, particularly a lot of our expatriate clients, they're not always immediately drawn to the local vernacular and local materials. It takes some time and some persistence to win them over and to tell them this is perhaps the right way or a better way of doing things. So we really need to embrace the stories that, like we're sharing here today, to, I think, draw out the history and the culture and the excitement of why these practices and why this look and feel of built environment and landscapes are really important to how we should continue to build in the future. And it's no different with the landscape. I mentioned the frankincense tree earlier, but countless examples of where I've learnt about some of the plants and materials of the UAE that were seemingly very innocuous, but then just become, an absolute obsession. And another favourite one of mine is desert cotton. It's called Latin is Aoeva javanica, and I learned about this plant, 5 or 6 years ago as well, and we put it into a project. And I learned the story of how this plant was used by the local Bedouin, because its common name is desert cotton. So it had these white, very soft flowers, very profuse. And apparently Bedouin used to strip the flowers off and stuff it into their camel saddles and their pillows at night for comfort. And the imagery of that, if you are wandering around the desert in a camel train hundreds of years ago, and you have very little comfort in this harsh climate, but the one thing that sustains you at night and doesn't give you a sore backside as you're riding on your camel for days is the flowers of this plant. I mean, that's a really beautiful thing. And this plant, by and large, just grows wildly on the sides of the street and the roads, and no one really takes note of it. But in the right setting, in a designed landscape or garden, it can be really stunning. And so those stories, I think, in the education piece is really important to start to share that passion and to turn people on to what these plants mean. And as I've shared that story with people over the years, I've heard it repeated and repeated around project teams, and it shows you the power of that imagery to capture people's imaginations. So using those local plants is first and foremost, but then also the materiality, and then coming on to some of the traditional cultural values and religious values, and starting to imbue our projects with that wherever it's relevant is I guess a shortcut into creating projects that are meaningful but also sit well within the landscape of the place that we live.
You said education is really key to this process, right? Could you tell us a little bit more about maybe how do you incorporate that in the work of Wilden Design itself? Like, is that part of maybe educating clients when they make perhaps outlandish requests, or if they have particular demands that aren't very rooted in what is possible even?
Yeah, it really depends on the person and their receptiveness to it. There are some people that are just frankly not interested, and it's a shame sometimes. But the people that perhaps you can sense they've got some intrigue in any element of what you do, there's always an opportunity just to push. We call it the Wilden ladder. It doesn't matter where you start with us on the journey. We just want to notch you up a little bit. So if you've never touched a plant in your life, if we can just get you to grow one basil plant on your balcony, for us that's success. If you're a bit of a nature nerd like me, and you want to garden an entire landscape, then if we can get you using some of these native plants, then that's the success. And I think those stories, like I mentioned with the desert cotton or the frankincense, I think if you can find a way of weaving that in, that really captures people's imaginations. Or trying to find a way to translate people's understandings and relationship with nature from their home countries into this territory. Or perhaps using the juxtaposition. I'm from the UK, and I grew up with a huge lawn in my garden because it's what grows and it's easy and that's what we have. It's completely impractical here. I think explaining that and trying to sell the benefits of adopting a different way of life and different lifestyle, or perhaps appealing to people's interests of saving money on water and irrigation and maintenance. So there are different ways, I think, of starting to subvertly get in some of these opportunities to change the landscapes around us.
No, I like how you said that, what's practical in some places is impractical elsewhere. And I think with those clients that are willing to have those conversations to even understand why maybe some plants, some types of gardens just won't grow here, they won't thrive here, even if they were to be brought in from the outside, let's say, is incredibly important. And I think also a good way of, with the work that Wilden Design does, I think there is just a lot of potential in general for bringing these particular types of plants that are native to the region to people's minds when they think of, what grows in UAE, what grows in the Gulf. It's not just, palm trees, which we love our palm trees, of course, and we also love our cacti, but there is also so much more than that. Like you said, frankincense, myrrh, and all kinds of different plants. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I have this. Well, we're actually approaching the end of the panel, but I wanted to ask the both of you, and perhaps if there's anyone in the audience who wanted to share, you're also welcome to do so. Do you recall a building or a space that is something of a lasting impression on you? Is there anything in particular about its design or its history or even the environment that made it so memorable? It doesn't have to be in the UAE, it could be absolutely anywhere.
I will share if you want. Well, I visited Sagrada Familia in Barcelona 4 or 5 years ago, and it blew my mind. It really just knocked me for six. I was, I visited a lot of churches and cathedrals, but I just wasn't expecting the multi-sensory overload in a space like that. I'd seen pictures, I'd heard the stories, but I think the scale of the project, coupled with all of the religious iconography, but more so all of the naturally inspired architectural elements. It's quite a biophilic building in many ways, and to see that done at such a high level of craftsmanship over such a long period of time, the fact that it's a multi-generational project, still incomplete to this day, and yet with thousands and millions of visitors passing through that church, all coming to see this incredible space, surely feeling some of the same things that I'm feeling. And to see the light pouring through the stained glass windows on different sides, and every single step that you take, facets of the architecture reveal something new in the light. It was incredible, and I was just sort of humbled by that experience. So that for me was a really lasting memory.
Thank you.
To tell you, I'm interested in every indigenous house because it's done by people and everything is done for a reason, and it has been tested many times and transmitted from generation to generation. So it's really a mirror of a memory of a place, very strongly reflected in all indigenous. I mean, if I'm here and I'm looking for indigenous houses where it was in Dubai, even in I'm from Palestine. In Palestine, I started a book in Palestine, a house which has been lived like for 400 years, and it shows all the history of Palestine. I mean, you can read history in one house. What did they do? So it's like any traditional house evoke a lot of things for me. It's a history lesson, so that's it. I mean, I'm interested in traditional houses.
I agree. We are in a traditional setting, and I think that's actually one of the things that I really liked about this panel when we were reaching out to you, Dr. Iman, and you, Will, and also to so many other speakers, just trying to bring together nature and cultural heritage in a panel, because there's so much synergy there, and there is most traditional houses do have some kind of a biophilic design, which is absolutely incredible, because I think sometimes we think of architecture that's modern when we think of biophilic design, but also so many traditional housing traditional houses also have biophilic designs just because they were built from the natural environment based on people's needs to survive or to live in a particular climate. And I think that's absolutely wonderful. I'm going to answer the question as well, because I didn't have an answer prepared, but last year I visited, I don't know if either of you have been to Cappadocia in Turkey, and it's a very, very interesting place, I'll tell you. It's this region in central Turkey, and there are all of these very strange elfish towers that are actually natural rock formations. And I've never in my life seen something so strange as little elfish looking towers, which also look like giant mushrooms, that people turned later into housing for themselves in this region, and it was inhabited by inhabited and also conquered by many different empires. And the people of that region also created an underground city. They made housing underground for themselves because the land area there is so flat. So that experience in and of itself, and looking at natural rock formations that were later turned into houses and look so strange. If you haven't Googled it, I urge you to Google it. It's there are a lot of interesting things to see. Is also just a really interesting, fascinating reminder of how nature sometimes presents the most beautiful forms of housing and architecture imaginable. And on that note, I wanted to turn to the audience. You guys have been absolutely wonderful and very patient with us. Does anyone have any questions for our lovely speakers? Please.
I'm pretty new as an architect, though, new to the UAE, and I'm wondering, were gardens actually a part of the courtyard here? I'm unfamiliar, and I see maybe a tree and a pot of water, but was there a garden element?
You know, in Al Jazeera specifically, I'm not. I wouldn't be able to tell you myself. Islamic gardens have a very different look and feel to a lot of the gardens and landscapes that I've produced, but over time, becoming sort of more interested in them as I start to grow my roots here and learn about them more. But in the historic village like this, I don't know how much gardening there was per se. I think it was mostly, as you said, centered around a tree if you were lucky enough to inhabit next to or with a tree. Perhaps you could share if you know there was a culture of gardening within this village.
No, as I told you, I mean, they said in every house there is an almond tree. In the desert, I mean, you should know also that they are Bedouin. I mean, their landscape is just to stay in the desert in an open air. I mean, this is their landscape, open air, no garden. But I mean, in the houses, I mean, I have been told that almond tree, I mean, they should be. Why? Because maybe it's a shaded. I mean, it's very thick, and they can have their fruits. I mean, they can have it, and it grows very, very quickly. This is what.
I think in Al Jazeera Al Hamra in particular, what I know from some of the conversations, because I'm no expert by any means. So, I'm no expert by any means, but I've had some conversations with a resident archaeologist in Ras Al Khaimah and a few of the other government officials who work in the Ras Al Khaimah Department of Antiquities and Museums. And what I understood from them is that the village itself is very tight-knit. So at its peak, it had 5,000 to 6,000 people, but that also means that a lot of the houses are quite small, and there isn't that much space. And the other aspect to this is back in the day, Al Jazeera Al Hamra was an actual island. So there was water surrounding the island because it was built into a lagoon. But in the 1960s and 1970s, after the village was abandoned, the government filled in the Sabra area around the island and fully connected it to the mainland because it was a shallow lagoon. So at high tide, it would become an island, and at low tide, it would connect to the mainland. So here, not particularly, but if you go to areas like even in Al Halla mountain village and in Wadi Shawka, one of the funniest things I see sometimes is a very rocky mountain and a tree poking out almost horizontally, or growing on what looks like a very ragged, very rocky surface. So, to the best of my knowledge, even in places like Al Halla mountain village, at places where the mountain meets the ground, those areas can be repositories of water. So there's groundwater, and there's also, I guess, water that allows trees to grow sometimes on the surface of mountains. But I think for a lot of those people, probably that was their garden, maybe. And I'm not entirely educated about what other architectural practices they might have had, but I do know that, of course, depending on the land itself and the soil, they probably did have something else. But here in particular, a lot of Bedouin, and even in this village, people subsisted on bread, fish, and not as many vegetables as we live with now.
So then wheat has been a constant then, I guess. If you're having bread, right? You're using wheat,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
but
Yeah.
more in a farming context.
Yes, definitely. Thank you. We have any other
I
questions?
don't know if you are familiar with other local trees like algaf. Algaf tree is a protected tree. I mean, it grows in the mountain and the desert. Also, they have a cedar tree.
Okay, yes.
These are the most famous palm, cedar, gaff, and almond tree. And these are the most famous. In the mountains, they have a lot of herbs, and every herb they can use it as a medicine. This is you can do this. This is can be done. So they are really depending on all these herbs in the mountains as a medicine, as a pharmacy. This is their pharmacy.
So they would sort of gather, but not necessarily cultivate.
No, no.
Unless you go to places like Alain, of course, where most famous for the palm plantations, and then underneath the canopy of a palm plantation, you often had 2 or 3 stories of secondary and tertiary cultivation. So often would be palms at the top canopy, and then fruit canopy in sort of mid-story, and then you'd have an underground canopy. Often might be things like wheat, but it might also be ground covers and melons and other soft fruits as well.
Is the date palm original to here? The date palm is an original species?
Yes, I think it depends how far you go back, and this is the challenge with a lot of plant history. I think the palm is endemic to the Gulf, as far as I'm aware. Whether it is specific to the UAE, I couldn't answer. I think Egypt, Iran, Mesopotamia, perhaps its original place. You know, palm trees need a lot of water, so they essentially don't survive here uncultivated. They're one of the most thirsty plants and trees that we can have. So, you know, it's only with real good justification and good water sources that you can justify a full palm plantation.
But yet the date seems like such an intrinsic part of the culture.
Yeah, no, it must have been indigenous because even if you look at the houses here, they have madbasas, which is a date press. A lot of them are built into the actual foundation of the house. And the date press is, if you just walk around and check some of the houses, you'll see it looks kind of like what I like to call a toaster. It has like these long vertical stone indentations, and then they all kind of lead towards a little central tube where essentially they would pile mountains of dates on top of each other, and the weight of the dates themselves would crush each other, and then the liquid that would pour out would be date molasses, and it would kind of gather in this little not underground, but this tube, and yeah, exactly, like a small container of sorts.
And the date palm for the UAE is very important. I mean, it gives them everything. I mean, it's a construction material, it's a food. I mean, they can see it's a roof, everything. I mean, all these rugs. I mean, everything they can benefit from it. So for them, it's very important. I mean, it gives them everything. I mean, in all. I mean, even when the dates. Even the seeds, they can benefit from it. They can burn it and turn it into like coffee or something. So everything from it, they used it. So for them, it's very important. It's part of their
heritage, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
culture.
And even the ceilings, like they would use mangrove beams, but also palm fronds. So they're 100% in. They do exist. They thrive in certain settings, not everywhere. In a desert, of course, otherwise we wouldn't.
More coastal settings.
Yeah, I think in particular areas, because I also know that, if I'm not mistaken, what Mr. Christian Velde told me is that they didn't necessarily have palm gardens on Al Jazeera Al Hamra. They had it in, I think, a little more inland in Ras Al Khaimah or another part, if I'm not mistaken. Inland, right? Yeah. This is what
They have oases. I mean, because the water is coming from the mountain.
The wadi.
They collect it. Yes.
Yes.
Even if you go to the mountains in Jabal Just down, there is an oasis. I don't know if you have been to Daya Fort. I mean, down there is a big oasis. I mean, and people are so either people of UAE are living in the mountain, they do animal farming or bee hunting. I mean, this is what they do. Or in the sea, they are fishing or pearl diving. Or in the desert, they have their oasis for palm. And so this is the way of how they live in the UAE. Where they located, I mean, they have their own culture.
Thank you so much.
All right. Any other questions? Well, on that note, I would like to thank you both so much for a very enjoyable conversation for me personally, and I hope also for our audience. And thank you all for being very attentive listeners. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to tag along, come up here and ask one-to-one. But aside from that, hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Please enjoy everything pet and family friendly weekend, excuse me, has to offer at Al Jazeera Al Hamra Heritage Village during the RAK Art Festival. Thank you all so much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.